Do you ever want to dive deeper into the Bible, but you just don't know where to begin or struggle to feel like you even have the time? When you read the Bible, do you get frustrated because you know there is so much more in there? You just have no clue how to get it out. Or maybe you just want to know the Bible better and you're looking for any resource to help. Well, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the Context and Color of the Bible podcast. We are two sisters. I'm Erica.
I'm Veronica.
We love to study the Bible and we love to help others understand it better. We have found that when it comes to our own study of Scripture, when we bring back the context, it actually adds to our understanding. It adds color to the black and white pages of the text. Veronica.
Yes.
You didn't tell me what number episode we're on.
It's right there.
Oh, it's right there.
On the notebook in front of us.
131?
Yep.
131.
Yes. We've had 131 podcasts.
And I still like you.
I know. I still like you.
That says something, I think.
It's funny because I've been at Erica's house for an hour. And the kids are like, when are you going to start recording? And it's like, I said it to him last Monday night when I was over here to record. And Asher was like, Aunt Wani, why does it take you so long? Like, yeah. Well, because first we have to just visit and talk to each other. Right. Like, don't you like talking to your sister? And he goes, no. Yes. Okay, one day you might.
You are 5 years old, child. Yes. You will one day understand.
Yes. So before we start recording, there's always like the chit chat catching up.
Right. My child did this.
Yes.
This happened
What do you
today.
think of this?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I always have to talk to your kids about what are they reading.
Yeah.
And lately I've been bringing library books.
She brought... Okay, yeah. Let me tell you, dear listener, the library book she brought today. There's one on parasites. Hookworms. Absolutely disgusting.
Yes.
And then there's one on Civil War injuries with pictures.
Yeah, when one chapter is pus and gangrene or
Yes.
something.
So these are the type of books, but I do have children that will be interested in these.
They're
so
up there
that
looking
is
at them right now.
yes, that is partially why she brought them.
Yes, I know these kids.
And if you're interested, she can tell you the titles.
Yeah, I got them off Read Aloud Revival. I'll have to go.
You can find them at your library, I'm sure.
Yep.
You probably will have to get on a waiting list because I'm sure
everybody wants
these.
Yes. Well, it's episode 131, but I forgot to tell you when we were prepping, I want to bring up, I finally got the Genesis breakdown.
Oh, yes. Yep.
You know, I've already put it on social media a couple times.
Right.
But with Exodus, we had Exodus. God redeems, God covenant, God dwells.
Right.
Based on memory.
Right.
And the idea is what we want is after people have studied a book of the Bible with us, these bigger books, we want them to have shelves to put things on to kind of help them capture that book better than just Exodus exit.
Right. We want you to have a feeling and a memory of the book.
Right. And be able to kind of go, okay, these chapters are about God redeeming, then God covenanting, God dwelling. Well, Erica knows I have been struggling with this with Genesis.
For months.
Yes. Probably since
last
January.
Year. You don't think even last year?
Maybe. I can't remember when we finally...
I don't either, actually. So maybe since January. We'll be nice and say for 3 months.
But it's just been like, I want these shelves for Genesis. And I was Marco Poloing a friend the other day, and we were talking about this.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, Genesis is like foundations and Abraham's faith and Abraham's family. And I'm like, that's it. Genesis 1 through 11 is laying foundations. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've been trying to do is just lay those foundations, those guns, and who is God and how does he introduce himself?
Right.
And then 12 through 50, we've been talking about Abraham's faith. You know, we see over and over again in the New Testament, by faith, Abraham's faith was credited to him as righteousness. And we're really trying to lay down, watch Abraham's faith through these chapters. And then as we move away from Abraham and get into Isaac, he doesn't get a lot of airtime, actually.
No, he doesn't.
But we get into Jacob, who gets a lot.
He's an interesting man.
Yes. And then Joseph, we watch Abraham's family, which to me is that setting up Scripture.
Right.
You have to have these foundations. Who is God? What do I know about him? What can I trust him to do?
Right.
How can I count him to be dependable and trustworthy?
Right.
And then Abraham's faith, all of this, the rest of Scripture follows Abraham's family.
Right.
Essentially.
Right.
But Abraham's faith is what comes into play.
Right.
That allows his family.
Yes. Yes.
to be the
Yep.
main characters then
Yep.
of the rest of Scripture. So
Mm-hmm.
after you've studied Genesis with us, and I've kind of been promoting on social media, like I said, you now have a way, listener, to help share Genesis with others.
Right.
You know, we're laying foundations, we're watching his faith, and we're watching his family.
Yeah.
So I forgot to say we were going to talk about that.
Yeah, that's great. I loved that picture you gave.
But now,
Those 3 things, yeah.
let's get into Genesis 14 and 15 today.
Right.
We left off last week watching Abraham's faith and watching God fulfill his promises. Notice all my F's lately.
I wasn't going to point it out because I thought F.
A lot of alliteration
Right.
going on. But so we're watching Abraham's faith. That's what we keep saying. Come back as you're reading these chapters. Watch Abraham's faith. Watch God's actions, reactions, God's faithfulness
Right.
to Abraham. So Genesis 14,
Okay.
verses 1 through 12. I'm not going to have you read those.
Okay, good, because it's a lot of
Yeah, it's a lot of big names.
names, which would be fun to say, but
I'll have you do it off the air to me.
right.
But we're kind of setting up just a couple of those guns on the wall.
Okay.
So we're setting up Sodom and Gomorrah.
Boo.
I know. They're going to come to play later on. We're setting up Melchizedek,
Right.
which I kind of said, Erica, it's not a gun that's really explained. And Erica was like,
Oh my word. Yeah, I've learned a little bit.
so we might have to have a bonus podcast
Yeah, that'd be fun.
just on Melchizedek, because that is apparently a bigger gun than I had pictured on the wall.
Right.
And with Melchizedek, then you get the king of Salem, which
Right.
I'm assuming all our listeners know, but Salem eventually becomes Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And so just laying some foundation. So as you're reading this chapter, as you're looking through it, pay attention. What are the king's behaviors? Because I would think the way the king acts is how his people are going to act.
Yeah. Yep.
So as we see later on, cities destroyed or not destroyed, cities blessed or cursed.
Pay attention to which ones.
Yes. So, but let's go back to the storyline.
Okay.
We've talked about God has promised Abraham, let me find my sticky note, that he is going to be a great nation, have a great name. He's going to bless those who bless. Erica's looking for my sticky note. It's gone. He's going to bless those who bless. He's going to and curse those who curse. He's going to personally bless Abraham, and all the world will be blessed through Abraham.
Right.
And so we've been kind of watching going, okay, God, are you faithful to what you promised?
You know, and one thing I love, and maybe I should give you a chance to get into the story to say this, Veronica, but one thing I love is I've always heard that explained that it all points to Jesus. And yes, I am not detracting from that at all. He's the ultimate blessing.
Right.
But I love how you're also pointing out here are other ways God is using Abraham and his family to bless those around them. I think that's such an important point.
Because otherwise, Abraham just, hey, we're just waiting for you to get to Jesus.
Exactly. Yes. And then what's the point?
Right.
You might as well fast forward, God, and get us straight to the New Testament, because what's the point? And so, yes, there's a reason God took 2,000 years or however many years it was. There's a reason we have this story and that God used Abraham in all these different situations. And I love, Veronica, how you keep pointing that out, and you're going to do it more today. Look at the ways God used Abraham to bless the world around him.
Well, because you go, if God came to that person, if he didn't mean it for it to come out in that person's life, why do we need the rest of Genesis then?
Yes.
Why are we studying his story?
That's
Why
a
is it
good
included?
point. Yes.
So we need to see, no, this is how God actually showed up
right now
in Abraham's life right now.
Yep.
Because again, it's laying that foundation. God is trustworthy and dependable.
When he says it, he'll do it. And it might take a while, but he will do it.
But we also need to see then, okay, so what happens with the sinful people who live in covenant with God?
Right.
Are they just amazing? Are they just, they never doubt, they never screw it up? Because then I have nothing to aim for.
Right.
Because I can't be like them.
Right.
So with the storyline, we're setting up Abraham at this point, pretend you don't know the story, doesn't have an offspring.
Right.
Doesn't have a baby boy, doesn't have Isaac. Abraham, to be a great nation, yes, he needs people around him who follow him, who go with him.
Right.
But he needs an heir to pass on his leadership to.
Right. Right.
And so even though, yes, we are seeing, oh, let me ask you this. before we get too far, when you picture Abraham, don't answer out loud, Erica. Just let people think. What do you, like, how many people do you picture with Abraham? How many tents? Like when Abraham moves locations, how many tents are going with him? Mm-hmm. 2 or 3? I know.
I'm not answering.
But so as Abraham's becoming a great nation, he's going to have people around him. He needs an heir.
Right.
So right now, the logical heir is his nephew, Lot.
Right.
And we know in chapter 13, God kind of did say Abraham, he separated Abraham and Lot.
Right.
Well, they separated. And then God came and told Abraham, hey, I'm still going to do what I've told you I'm going to do. But from Abraham's perspective, the only way I can carry on my name
is through Lot.
Well, guess what happens? Lot's in trouble.
You kind of, poor Lot, but it just kind of like,
really?
Go figure. You're just not surprised.
No, Lot's moved closer to some cities, and we get in verses 1 through 12, kind of setting up some players for a battle that's going to be taking place. This has been going on for like 12, 13 years. These different kingdoms, basically a city would be its own little kingdom.
Right.
We're battling each other, and Lot.
So Lot moved in maybe knowing there was like maybe
tension?
This was contested ground,
maybe,
or at least had an idea.
Yeah, maybe picked what he thought was the winning side.
Right. Oh, good point.
Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah.
But in the end, Lot gets taken.
Yeah.
Along with a bunch of other people and material possessions.
Right.
And so that's kind of 1 through 12 is setting up the seed. Abraham's seed is in danger.
Well, who would appear to be the seed.
Right. And so we get the 13 through 17. Erica, if you would read verse 14, please.
When Abraham heard his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan.
Okay, so we just found out how many people trained men does Abraham have in his camp?
318.
Okay. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of men.
Because those are the trained men. That means there's young men coming up, and there's men who have aged out.
Right. And then you have families.
Right.
Women and children.
So let's say those 318 men have a wife.
Right there you've got at least 600 then.
Right. And then they tended to have a lot of kids back then.
Right.
So let's just be reasonable and say each couple had one child.
Right.
That's like 900 people. So actually, when you work it out that way,
that's a lot of people, but it makes sense.
It does. And you go, okay.
Wow. That's a little city.
It is.
A little village, I guess.
And so when you've been picturing Abraham moving, and we don't know how long it took to acquire
Right.
all these people, but so you now have that many people.
Right.
You have material possessions, tents, food supplies.
Right, because they didn't go to the latest supermarket. They
right.
carried everything with them.
Right. Then you have animals.
Right.
Carrying stuff.
Right.
We know Abraham feeds a goat,
right.
something. Can't remember which kind of animal.
To the stranger.
Yes. Later on.
Right.
And then Abraham's wife, Sarah.
Right.
That actually speaks well to her because she's going to help manage all this.
Yes. That was her responsibility to run the household.
Which is a huge household.
Right. It's a business. She's
is.
running a business at that point, essentially.
I mean, you try to feed and keep track of and make sure. I mean, as the leaders, it's their job to provide and look out.
Right.
Okay, where are we going to move? We got to make sure we have enough water. We have enough food. The slower ones, the weaker ones can travel with us.
So if someone's sick and needing a doctor who's giving birth, what animals are sick? Who needs more clothes? Who's growing out of clothes? I mean, just all the different details that come with having that many people and being responsible for all of them.
So in a way, we're already setting up kind of a great nation.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, like I said, you need a leader to run that nation.
Right.
But you're setting that up. So Abraham takes his 318, which then goes into the idea of he goes in, he pulls off the raid. If you can read then verse 16.
Verse 16. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions together with the women and the other people.
So we're setting up, Abraham not only has wealth Abraham also has wisdom and military know-how to pull off a raid like this.
Right.
To go in and be successful,
Right.
he didn't just stumble into it.
No, that's true.
I wouldn't say it was just beginner's luck or dumb luck. Abraham knew. Abraham's got some wits about him.
Right.
And knows what to do. Did he have them in Egypt? I don't know. Has he been acquiring them as his holdings, his people,
as his journeyings have gone on and he's grown with that.
Right. But at this point, Abraham knows what to do. And so he goes in, and I love it. He not only saves his nephew Lot, but he also gets all the possessions.
Right.
And he saves the women and other captives. Well, if part of the promise to Abraham is your name will be great, guess what happened for every family who just had a loved one returned?
Yep.
Who are they going to talk about? Who are they going to say, oh, you are not going to believe who pulled this off?
Right.
His name's Abraham. So now we have your name great, your reputation, your character is becoming well known.
Right.
Because there's nothing saying, we don't know how many people were taken.
Right.
But it to go in with 318
had to be a big group that was taken and that you're fighting against.
And so we're watching as God is fulfilling through what would seem to be a bad situation.
Right.
Yeah. God fulfilling his promise to Abraham of you can't just get a great name by doing nothing.
Right.
You really have to do something. Abraham, I hate to tell you, in order to have a great name, you've got to be put in hard spots and come out on top.
And Lot, even by association with Abraham, and this isn't the only time we'll see it, he gets blessed and protected. Right. Like there's some trickle down effect.
Bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you.
All right, Lot, you are getting some of that protection because guess who's your uncle?
Mm-hmm. That umbrella is pretty big and the blessings flow freely.
Yeah.
And so what I just love is that we have this whole chapter, to me, chapter 14, is just showing God's faithfulness to what he promised Abraham.
Right.
If we're going to know God's faithful, if we're going to know Abraham's faith, we've got to actually see some in-person live events happening.
Right.
We've got to see what Abraham does.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're also then, if you get through 17 through the rest of the chapter, then these kings who Abraham fought for or against came alongside. Well, what does the king of Sodom do?
He basically, doesn't he say, you can take everything, but I just want my people back.
Right. But there's no thanks recorded.
Right.
There's no gifts recorded. There's no blessing recorded. So kind of setting up.
I expected you to help Abraham, or I knew you would do it, or you should do it for me.
Right. I'm kind of in it for myself.
Yeah. Ungrateful, self-centered.
Yes. So again, how the leader is.
Right.
The rest of the people are. So when we get later to Sodom and Gomorrah, we've laid a slight little foundation of they're not the most thankful.
Right.
Versus Melchizedek, king of Salem, who comes out.
Right.
And he blesses Abraham. He blesses God, actually.
Right. Yep.
He comes out and he blesses God, blesses Abraham. Abraham gives him 1/10 of the plunder. And so again, setting up, here is... What do we know about later about Salem, Jerusalem?
Right.
It becomes the place God puts his name on.
Right.
And so just, again, laying some little light foundation of we can expect the area of Salem to play out.
In a good way.
And yes.
Yeah.
So that's chapter 14.
Right.
Now let's get to 15. We've watched how God is fulfilling his... Your name's going to be great. We're going to bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, personally bless you, make you a great nation. But the problem with being a great nation is we're missing
the heir, the offspring.
Yes.
The seed.
Yes. So Abraham comes to God, or God comes to Abraham. And you brought up a point about the reward.
Well, it always struck me as fascinating that at the end of 14, the king of Sodom says, Abraham, you can take everything. And Abraham essentially says, no, like, I don't want your reward. I want to be rewarded by my God. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not going to take your reward, Sodom, because I'm holding out for a better reward. And then in verse 15, it starts out with God coming to Abraham saying, I am your reward. And it's like, okay, Abraham, because you refused the earthly material, God gave you himself. You did get rewarded. And your reward was God himself. I think Abraham came out on the winning end of that deal.
He picked well.
He picked well. Yeah, but it's just, I hate that chapter break right there because I think we missed the connection between the rewards.
That would probably not be the first and last time we have said on this podcast we don't like chapter breaks.
Right.
But so we have God and Abraham talking. And Abraham legitimately comes to God and says, I don't have an heir.
Because how old is Abraham at this point? 80s? 70s?
Probably. He was 75 when we first met him.
Right. And it's been a few years.
So he's between 75 and 100.
Yeah.
Probably between 75 and 90.
Yeah.
I would say. So we have Abraham and God. And Abraham, what I love though is Abraham's like, God, I don't have an heir.
Right.
What are you doing?
Right.
And watch God's response. He doesn't get mad. He doesn't get upset. He doesn't go, I've told you, be patient. It's coming.
Which is how I tend to react to my children when they ask a question. Again and again.
And so verse 6, if you would read that, because this is that key verse we keep talking about in the New Testament.
Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness.
And so we've talked about that idea of righteous. We've talked about it with Noah, that in righteousness, that means in the court of law, your actions are declared to be in the right. And so Abraham, his actions are declared to be in the right. And he questions God in verse 8. He says, how can I be sure that I'll actually possess this? That this will actually happen? And what struck me is what God didn't say and what God did. He could have just said, Abraham, I've told you, just trust me. Be patient. I told you it'll happen. Right. But instead, what I love is God says, you know what, Abraham? I get it. You need something better to hold on to. And the only thing I can do, Abraham, is the best thing I can give you is to swear by myself. And I love that because in Hebrews 6, it said, verse 13, for example, there was God's promise to Abraham. Since there was no one greater to swear by, God took an oath by his own name, saying, I will certainly bless you. I will multiply your descendants beyond number. Then Abraham waited patiently and received the promise what God had promised. Now, when people take an oath, they call on someone greater than themselves to hold it. And without any questions, that oath is binding. God also bound himself with an oath, so that those who received the promise could be perfectly sure he would never change his mind. Now, first of all, I have it memorized in the NIV, and I don't know what translation that is.
I think that's New Living Translation.
So it threw me off a little bit. But I love the fact that God says, Abraham, I am so certain. I so want you to have comfort and rest in this. I'm going to give you the best thing I can give you.
Right.
And the best thing I can give you that you can take it to the bank, it will never be revoked, it will never change, is I'm going to make a covenant with you. Because if I break my covenant, I will die. And so I love that God goes, I'm going to give you, here's the way to have absolute certainty. Take it to the bank. Nothing will ever change this fact. I'm going to give you heirs. And he makes a covenant with Abraham.
It makes me think, Veronica, and I don't know, maybe my brain works in a crazy way, but it makes me think of how Dr. Pudwa, a man we both follow for homeschooling, says, IEW, when kids ask for help, you always give it to them. Because if they don't need help, they won't ask for it. But when they need help, they ask, you help them. And it makes me think of God. Like when we go to God, I need help. He will always answer. Number one, we always need him.
Right.
And so it's a good reminder for us. But number two, there's a humility and a childlikeness in Abraham right now that, God, I'm struggling with this promise. Help me believe you. And God does.
What do I have in those dark moments?
Right. You know, God gives you something to cling on to. And maybe it's not like a flaming torch that God gives you. Maybe it's a verse or a friendship or a card or whatever. But we can go to God in those moments and ask for help. And he does. He is so gracious. Like you said, he didn't get mad at Abraham. He didn't smack him upside the head and say, how dare you question me?
Right.
Like, no, I need help. God, I need help. Great. Here I come. I want to help.
And the best thing I can give you is a covenant because Abraham, now
Right.
I can never break it.
Right.
Because only God walked through the pieces.
Yep.
So that meant it all rests on God.
Right.
That means God can never break it. Abraham, there's nothing required of you.
Right.
And so you're not the one walking through the pieces. This is all about me, and I can never break this now. Nothing can ever change it. And he did that with Noah.
Mm-hmm.
He set up with Noah and humanity, I will never destroy the earth with a flood again.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I'm putting it's almost like God's handcuffing himself.
Yeah.
Of here's what I want to do, but I want to make sure the people I'm doing this with really understand the seriousness of it. And so I put in a way, God's putting limitations on himself of Abraham. It doesn't matter what your family does. It doesn't matter what the generations to come do.
Right.
I can't break this.
Right.
And
Which, how grateful, because if we could break it, we would.
oh,
Let's be honest. If
Yeah.
it was up to us,
well,
it
let's
would
look at
be
the Moses
broken.
and the Israelites. As
Right.
soon as they did
Right.
they covenanted with God.
what did they do with the golden calf?
Right. Look at Adam and Eve.
Right.
And so I just love that God puts it all on himself.
Right.
Abraham, here's what you can have.
Right.
And so, but with that, there's a couple little small guns in a way that I just want to bring up. Verse 5, God takes Abraham out and says, look at the stars.
Right.
This is how your descendants are going to be. Well, what did Joseph dream about?
He dreamt about stars and sun and moon and
Right.
wheat and
So there's just a little link there.
Right.
But also a bigger gun that you see God represented as fire. That smoking pot, that
Right.
blazing
Right.
torch. We see that over and over again in scriptures. Mount Sinai,
yeah.
the day of Pentecost, Shavuot,
Yeah.
when those tongues of fire come down. Our God is a consuming fire, Hebrews says.
Mm-hmm.
He's a refining fire. That is just, I love that God doesn't allow an image to be made, like a picture of him, but he uses symbols and illustrations in a way of other things that represent him.
Right.
Because fire can be good and bad.
yeah. It can be it's dangerous.
Yes.
Even in good, it's dangerous.
Right. So I love that idea that God uses that. So just, as you're teaching your kids,
Yeah.
or as you're teaching Sunday school, or you're interacting and teaching junior high or whatever, point that out of the beauty of fire, the danger of fire, and the good that fire
Right.
can do
Right.
when it's in control, when it's being used for the right purposes, of just
Right.
what images do we see of God? What does he use to represent himself?
Well, it's that great quote from Narnia, and I've used
Yes.
it numerous times where they're talking about Aslan and how terrifying he is, and coming before him, you're going to be scared to death. And they're like, the kids are like, oh, but we thought he was good. And they're like, of course he's good, but he's not safe.
Right.
He's the king. And I think we need to get back into that perspective of God. Like, of course he's good, but he's not safe.
Right.
He's God.
Right. You don't just walk into his presence
Right.
without thinking about it first.
Right. He's God.
So we have chapter 15 ending with God basically saying to Abraham, I'm going to give you an offspring. I'm going to give you descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as countless as sands on the seashore. And so, which sets us up then for next week. When a way you kind of go, okay, God promises it. It won't. How long does it take?
Right.
All these other parts of the covenant, all these other parts of the promises God gave Abraham, we start seeing within the next couple verses
Right.
it happening, God fulfilling it. So the question then is, how long is Abraham going to have to wait
That's quite the
for the seed to come?
right.
And what happens is Abraham goes, okay, God, I know it's coming. It was Abraham's faith was credited to him.
Right.
He believes. But now let's see what he does with his belief, with his understanding, as he's looking at it from his perspective.
Right. What actions?
Does Abraham have? Which we
Yeah.
all know the story.
Right. Right.
But the idea is just as we're trying to get to know Abraham's faith,
Yeah.
is we're watching him walk it out.
Does he do it perfectly?
And does God come through right away? Does God promise that he give? Does that mean it's going to happen in the next week, next month, the next year?
God's timetable is so different. Can I just be honest about that? Like, it
Yes.
is so not my timetable.
Right.
Which sometimes irritates me. I will not lie. There are times when I'm like, Lord, if I were in your shoes, I would be doing things so differently right now. And it's a good thing I'm not God, because he
Right.
knows he's obviously God. But His timetable's so different.
Right. But sometimes we need that reminder.
Yeah.
God didn't give it to Abraham right away.
Right.
Abraham had to walk through a lot
Right.
to get to that
Right.
seed. So he's seeing most of the promises be fulfilled.
Right.
But that big one's not.
And
So-
that almost makes the other ones like,
What's the point?
what's the point?
Right. So that's what we have to look forward to next week in our podcast.
Right.
So thanks for joining us. This is the Context and Color of the Bible podcast. As always, we would love for you to share this with someone else. We are really trying hard just to get what an amazing God we serve out there.
Yeah.
Because there are people who have, and not that we have a complete view of God, but have views of God that would break your heart.
Mm-hmm.
If you understood that they see God as a vengeful, unkind, uninvolved. And what we're trying to do is go, we serve an amazing God, and we want to get people to see that. And the best way to do it is go, here's the story God included of himself, and let's see what he does. And let's take his written word to us and go, okay, God, this is who you said you are.
Yeah, so get a small group together,
Yes.
listen and talk about it. What are things you could bring up that we didn't
Right.
cover or missed? You know, we'd love to hear other ways you saw God's
Yep.
faithfulness and other things you've learned about God
Yep.
through Genesis.
Yep. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.